Hello, my name is Matt Dover, and this is the first in a series of VIP Basics training sessions. And so this is VIP 101, and what we're going to do is we're going to read an Excel sheet, and we're going to print various things to the log. The problem here is to read an Excel sheet, and then for each data row in the sheet, we're going to print out data row begin and data row end. So let's go to VIP. Well, first let's in fact look at the sheet that we're working with. And so this sheet here, it has 20 rows excluding the headers. It has some very basic test data in it. So it will have, let's say this is a building number. That's a random city. Here we have a street address. Here we have an account name. And then on the end, we have a person's name who has these records associated with them. What we're going to do first is read an Excel sheet. We pull onto this palette here from the activity Read Excel Data. We have this widget which is asking us what do we want to read our Excel sheet into, and the object we use is what's called a System.Data.DataTable. So this is a very common object in .NET. We can find it online here. So we look here and we see we have this data table class. It's in the namespace System.Data. And we have various functions, lots of functionality within this class that we can work with in order to manipulate data and things like this. And so what we're going to do now is provide some arguments to this activity, some mandatory arguments. And we see here that we need to give the sheet name for this Excel sheet, which is data, and we need to give the path of this. And what we're going to do is actually create two parameters, which I have here. So the first parameter is the file path, and the second one is the sheet name here. And so we've created these parameters, both of type string, by clicking this create argument button here. Now, let's get rid of this old argument. And so what we'll do is we'll populate this here with the file path and the Excel sheet name. That goes here. And then now we've read the sheet, we want to do something with the sheet. And so what we need to do is specify some output parameter. And so these were input parameters. This is an output parameter. This is our data table object that I spoke about earlier. And so we need to provide a variable to hold this. And so we have var output data table that I've created here. And I found its type. So let me just do this again. So we go, let's say, so sometimes you may need to specify the whole namespace. So you go System.Data.DataTable, and we find it here. And we say, okay. So we got System.Data.DataTable, and then we place this into here. And so now we've read our Excel sheet into a data table. If we quickly go back to the task, and so we remind ourselves that for each row we're printing these two strings. And so what we need to do is iterate over each row and print the strings. And so what we can do here is first we go back to this for each activity, and we see that we need to provide some container, an array or a list, for instance, over which we can iterate, but also we need to provide the type. So within our array, what type are we going to be iterating over? I can tell you that in the case of data table, we have this array of data rows. So each table has an array of rows. And so what we need to do is find this object, and we have System.Data.DataRow. And then we need to convert our data table into an array of data rows. We go back to our variables and we say, okay, well, the data table is this. And we're still getting complaints because, we've just used the data table here and we need to convert it to the rows. So we perform this method called select on the data table, which you can find in the .NET framework. You can do some research about that, and then the complaint goes away. And so now all we need to do is print out to the log what was specified, which is data row begin. So we'll copy paste this whole thing. Make sure we surround it in double quotes. And then we'll add another log activity. And we've automatically added a sequence here when we do this. And we'll print out data row end. Okay, and we'll save this somewhere. Let's call this print for data row. Now we run this. Oh, and we find that actually because I've got the Excel open, there's a problem. So I'll close that. And we run it again, and we have data row begin, data row end. Okay. And I'm not going to sanity check this, but I promise you that there are indeed 20 data row begins and data row ends. And so that's the first task complete. And now what we need to do is for each element in each row, print its value separated by a space. And so if we go back to our Excel, we see for our Excel that whilst each data table has an array of data rows, so 20 rows as we spoke, each data row also has an array of elements. So the row itself has an array of elements, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a two-dimensional array. You can think about it like that. So effectively, if we're iterating over the data table to create, an array of data rows, then for each data row, we also need to iterate over its elements to get access to each element because we have an array of elements. And so in VIP, what we do is we pull onto the palette ForEach action, which will nest within our previous ForEach, and that's here. And so very much like programming, what we're going to do here is use an iterator or an index to iterate over all the columns in our Excel spreadsheet. So columns 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we must determine dynamically, so without hard coding, how many columns we have within this data table, because we need to return to here them indexes as an array, right? So here we want an array that says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so what we can do is we can search, generate a list of ints between a range C#, and we see this method here, enumeral.range. So we need to provide it with a start and an end. And what it will return us is the value for, or an array of values within this range. Here we go copy paste. And we copy paste in here. And we start from 0. And the end is actually the column count. So we need some way of getting the number of columns. And so what we can do is use this function. So we use our data table again. So we copy paste this here. And we go back here. And we can get the columns, which provides us with an array of columns. And then if we click again on these columns, we can actually get the count for the columns, which is what we want. So now we've got the count for all the columns. So the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 columns in this instance. And so I'm going to change the name of this iterator variable, this index, to column index. And then I'm going to go one level up and change the name of this data row iterating index to data row. Fairly simple. And so I go back in for each that's iterating over the elements. And then what we'll do is we'll simply use this data row property. So we have the data row. Going back here, we have data row. So we're going to use data row. And then within the data row, we need the index, which is our column index, I think. Moving back, let's copy paste just to be sure. So this now is the element within the data row, but we need to convert this to a string. And then we're going to separate it with a space. So we use this plus to concatenate, which is simply just adding strings together. And I'll put one on this side as well. And so now, taking a step back, we see that we're iterating over each data row, and we're writing data row begin. And then the next action is within the data row, we're iterating over each element and then adding all the values using this. And then after we've finished iterating over the elements, we're writing data row end. And so we save this flow and then we run it. And then we find, oh, I've got the Excel open once again. And so I close the Excel. And then we find in the logs, if we click this button here, we have data row begin. And here I've included the headers. And so what we can do is we can ignore the headers. So we have has header and we can write true. And in this instance, it will ignore the headers. And so we look again and we see here, if I show the Excel alongside it, cancel. Oh, log, second log. You know, we have the values here. So we have this one printed here, we have this one printed here, this one there, and so on and so forth for each row within the Excel. And so that concludes our video. Thank you for listening.